The Orioles farm system is stacked and still ranked as maybe the best in baseball. So today, bringing on some guests to do a draft to try and put together the best team we can, full of Orioles prospects. That's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Wednesday, March 13th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we've got a special one, something we've been doing over the past few years in the preseason, kind of in the middle of spring training here on the podcast. And that is our Orioles minor league / prospect draft. And we're going to be joined by the three co-hosts of Orioles On The Verge, a fantastic podcast over at the Believe Podcast Network that does a great job covering the Orioles minor league system and the team in the majors as well. Those hosts are Bob Phelan, Zach Spedden, and Nick Stevens. They've all been on this pod separately and together many times before. If you are a longtime listener, you know the three of them. But they're coming on the pod today for part one of our minor league draft. Essentially, all players that are available are anyone in the Orioles system who has not yet made their major league debut. So a guy like Heston Kjerstad, a guy like Colton Cowser, while still prospects, not eligible for this draft. But Jackson Holliday, Kobe Mayo, Samuel Basallo, they certainly are. Today will be part one, as we will do rounds 1 through 7 of the 13-round draft, picking our teams, an entire starting lineup, plus 3 starting pitchers and a relief pitcher as well. And then when we're back tomorrow, it'll be part 2 with rounds 8 through 13. And that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. So you know the rules. We are going to jump to it now with the three co-hosts of Orioles On The Verge. It is our 2024 Orioles minor league draft with part one coming up right now. All right, we welcome in the crew from Orioles On The Verge. Once again, they are Nick Stevens, Zach Spedden, and Bob Phelan. They host that podcast, which does such a great job covering not just the Orioles minor league system, but the major league team as well. But we are going to focus on the minors in our 2024 Orioles minor league draft. And now I'm not sure who did the people pick? Do we remember who did the people pick to win this last year after the draft versus I think Bob and I put it out at the end of the season to try and I'm trying to think back on who did well here. I'm not really sure from last year.
Didn't somebody have Samuel Basallo and Kobe Mayo? I think I was looking at those earlier, the rosters earlier. I feel like
that
it was
would
that
probably
roster.
be a good call. Yeah, I would probably take whoever did that. It's hard to remember my roster. Yeah, if I just see a roster and for me, if Maxwell Costas is on it, that's probably my roster. But if I was looking around at some of the ones we posted, but I just went through the rules for everyone. So we are going to jump into the draft. I did a randomizer for the draft picks this year, and Zach won the number 1 overall pick. Now, I have an assumption of who is going to be drafted number 1 overall, but I will cede to Zach to get our draft started.
I'm going to guess your assumption is correct, and that is Jackson Holliday. It's really a no-doubter. Best prospect in baseball, going to be the second baseman on opening day for the Orioles, going to be a front runner for Rookie of the Year, coming off such a strong first professional season. This is really a no-doubter.
Yeah, and people should know the way we grade this out is just kind of however we want. So it doesn't matter if Holliday only plays 3 weeks in the minors this year. It doesn't matter if he doesn't play a game in the minors at all. He's eligible because he hasn't played a game in the majors before, and we basically just eye it up at the end of this draft. But we go to Bob, and I feel like there's a pretty maybe set top 3, so interested to see who Bob goes with the number 2 pick here.
Yeah, I'm going to go with, there's a couple guys here that I would love to pick. I'd actually love to take Colton Cowser and just put him right in center field, because that's where he's going to be playing his entire professional career. No, I'm just kidding. But he's not eligible. I'm going to go with the catcher. I just think the gap between this catcher, Samuel Basallo, who I'm picking, and the rest is a little too wide. Got to take advantage of that. So I'm going with Sammy.
Yeah, that was my thought. If I hadn't randomized myself to the 4th pick, it was like Basallo is so far, nothing against the other catchers in the system, but Basallo is so good that he is so far ahead that you were going to get just a giant leap over everybody else. So it goes to Nick, who ended up with the third pick.
Well, I kind of shocked you went Basayo there. Honestly, I prefer my catchers to actually know how to catch behind the plate. No, very good defensive catchers in his own right, but I think there is a clear top three. I'm not going to stray from it. I'm going Kobe Mayo. I'm going to put him at third base. Of course, yeah, just a tremendous year last year. He finally had that real breakout in AA and in AAA. And then the spring training, we just had our episode Tuesday night when we recorded our main episode this week. And like I mentioned, then he's evolving this spring, shooting balls the other way off Chris Sale. Articles coming out talking about his improved defense over at third base, hopefully trying to quiet some of the doubters there. So happy to have Kobe Mayo in the heart of my lineup.
Yeah, that was pretty much the consensus top three, I would think. That is kind of where we're at with this Orioles system. I think this time last year when we did this draft, I would say, Nick, that like there was probably more than a consensus top three. I mean, Gunnar Henderson was not in this group. So you were picking, how good do you feel about Kerstad or Kowser versus, Mayo at this point last year and other guys like that. I think it was a little tougher probably at the top of the draft last year. So I have the double here. I've got the 4 and the 5 on the snake draft, and I have essentially lost the top 3, no doubt about it, picks. So I was considering maybe just grabbing the pitching and seeing if I can take it away from the rest of the group. So I'm going to go ahead and just back-to-back grab Chase McDermott and Cade Povich on my team, because the 3 absolute boppers, no doubt studs in the majors are off the board from a hitting side, and there are still some great hitters left. But we know that the pitching is getting better and better. We still know that the hitting is above the pitching in this system. So I think McDermott makes a bigger impact than Povich at the big league level this year. I think McDermott ends up being the better pitcher long-term than Povich, but Povich's stuff and being a lefty is so enticing that he is up there as well. And I have now, I think, secured, as we will send it back over to Nick, the best top of the rotation that anyone will have in this draft, I personally think.
Yeah, I was hoping to get one of those two guys that you grabbed, but smart strategy. I like it. But that is going to leave me with, I could go pitcher as well, but I don't think I am. I got 2 options staring at me in the face here. Do I want speed? Do I want a little bit more power? I'm going to go Connor Norby. Put Connor Norby over there at second base. I really wanted an outfielder here, but I'm going to go Connor Norby. Like, the guy hits. In any other organization, he'd be a top prospect. Brandon Hyde said so himself just the other day. Great year last year. The home runs, not as many home runs as when he led all the minor leagues in home runs the year before, but still more than 20 home runs last year at the AAA level, hits for a high average. Defense at second base is good enough to put in this lineup, and Connor Norby and Kobe Mayo, I like the start for me.
I want to go around and ask everybody.
Oh.
I was just going to go around and ask everybody, Connor Norby ends the year in AAA, in Baltimore, or in another system?
I hate to say it, but another system. I would rank that another system 1, AAA 2, the Orioles 3, unfortunately, because he's a great player.
I agree with Bob. It's probably going to be another system. I would switch it around, though, and say that if he's not traded by the deadline, he is in the big leagues at the end of the year. I don't think he'll be a AAA again for the entire season, but I would agree it's probably going to be another system.
I said before in an episode a couple weeks ago, bold prediction. I don't know how it happens. Maybe I don't want to know how it happens, but I think he ends the year in the majors playing a significant role for the Orioles. I'll stick with that.
Yeah, I think it's another team, but I think I agree with Zach somewhat. I mean, would they really leave him in AAA for an entire extra season? And I believe this offseason is when he would become Rule 5 eligible. So at that point, if he's still here, it's like, well, if you can find any useful way for him, even in September when rosters expand, you might as well call him up because you're going to put him on the 40-man a month later anyway. But yeah, he just feels like Joey Ortiz plus more in terms of how much he's blocked on this team. And it's nothing against him. Hyde's quote was correct. I mean, he could be the top prospect if he were in the right organization right now. And he's just not, unfortunately for him. And hopefully he will be a good player in the big leagues for someone. I think I can at least say that, but we'll go back to Bob to add to Samuel Basayo on his team.
Yeah. And Sorry, Connor, I'm not intimidated by the back-to-back pitcher picks because I feel like this is the year of the pitcher. We've said it on our podcast. The depth is building there. And yeah, those two guys are great. Two of the top three for sure in the system. But I feel like there are some guys by the end of the year that will be right up there with them. So I'm going to avoid pitcher again. I'm going to go for the high floor, high ceiling, first round pick from last year, Enrique Bradfield Jr. Give me the elite defense in center field, elite base stealing ability, great eye at the plate, good swing decisions. Just get him to hit the ball, maybe a little bit harder, a little bit more lift to it. I'm feeling really good about him ending the year in AAA and knocking on the door for 2025.
I mean, he's probably the consensus top outfielder in the system potentially by the end of this year.
It's either him or the other guy I was between for this pick, who I'm guessing Zach's going to take with one of his next two.
Yeah, Zach's got the double here.
So I will go with the position player with this pick, but I'm not going to go with the guy that I think Bob thinks I'm going to take. I'm going to go with Matt Horvath. I want to bolster my infield. I think that Horvath comes into the system with a lot of interesting tools. He looked good last summer. And honestly, I think if the Orioles tap into his raw power a little bit, we're talking about a possible 10 top 100 prospect going into 2025. So I'm going to take Horvath, and then I'll get my first pitcher off the board with the next pick. I'm going to take Seth Johnson. Looks good in camp right now. Fastball velocity is back. You add in the cutter to the mix he already had, and I could see him really taking off. And he's already got a 40-man roster spot, second year on the 40-man. So good chance he's in the big leagues at the end of this year.
I got to ask you, Matt Horvath, where are you putting him on the diamond? You've got already on this team another infielder in Jackson Holiday, so I know he could play everywhere. Where are you putting him initially?
I'm going to put him at third initially.
All right, we will swing it back over to Bob.
Yeah, I'm surprised and pleasantly surprised because I will quickly take Dylan Beavers and throw him in right field. Just think his second half was excellent last year. I'll get a nice defensive outfield between Enrique and center, Beavers in right. The bat is a little bit, of a project still. You got to get that raw power into game power. I have faith that it's going to happen. Start back in AA this year, and he'll also end up in AAA. But Horvath is a good pick because I think he's got a ton of helium, so can't fault that at all.
So we'll jump back into part one of our minor league draft with the guys from Orioles on the Verge in just a moment. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. Now, football season, it might be over, but the action on the floor is heating up. So whether it's tournament season or the fight for playoff home court, shortage high-stakes basketball moments this time of year. And you can get it on the excitement with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where you can turn your hoops knowledge into serious cash. What do you need to do? You just pick more or less on any stat line. And I've been checking it out for college basketball because this week during Champ Week, it's basically all I'm doing is recording this podcast, going to work, and watching college basketball. So looking through this Wednesday slate here of the college basketball season, there are a lot of big games that are going on here. So let's move things to, how about we go to Villanova? They're in a game against DePaul where they need to win to keep their tourney hopes alive. Eric Dixon, more or less than 6.5 rebounds. He's going to dominate the boards against one of the worst teams in the country. Take more than 6.5 rebounds for Eric Dixon. And if you want to get on that action, you can just download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the Prize Picks app and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100 on Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
All righty. I thought you were going to leave me Beavers. I thought for sure he was going to be there, but I'm staring at a pitcher that I really want, but I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to read the board here and assume that Connor's not going to just murder us all with the pitching and avoid it here for this pick. And I'm going to go up the middle and Judd Fabian, put him out there in center field. Very extreme three true outcomes last year when he got up to Bowie, but the strikeout rate was pretty enormous. But he also had a 15+% walk rate, 15 home runs at the AA level. Only hit 176, but hopefully the strikeouts come down. The average gets up this year. Probably starts in AAA, I guess. TBD. We'll see in a week or so. But elite questions about the bat aside, elite center field defender, threat on the base paths as well. I like shoring up the defense here and hope the bat breaks through a little bit next year.
Yeah, so now you've taken the kind of top flight outfielders off the board for me. And the elite infielders are probably gone. So I got the double again. I'm just going to take Justin Armbruster. I mean, I'm just going to build the rotation right there. I am going to build the top 3 in Norfolk's rotation to begin the year, most likely, as my rotation on this team. I've already got Povich. I've already got McDermott. Give me Armbruster, who, good story from John Mioli, it was a couple weeks back about how maybe he could be the first one who's kind of this homegrown guy drafted by the Orioles and that actually makes it to the big leagues as a pitcher. And it does seem like he's kind of got that inside track because, of course, McDermott and Povich both came over via trades as prospects. And so, yeah, why not? I think Armbruster, it feels like to me, just the way he throws just has maybe the highest floor out of all these guys. Like I could just see him floating in as the 4th or 5th starter for the Orioles for like 6 or 7 years. Like, I just feel like he has the stuff where I don't think anyone thinks he's going to be an ace ever at the big league level, but he's got the stuff where they like the hoppy fastball. They're working on the breaking balls. He seems to be pretty durable, that I'm just excited to have him in that rotation. Now, I have already shored up my entire rotation. We're only doing 3 starting pitchers this year. I am done. I don't think it's smart drafting to go with a reliever and just take all of my pitchers right now, although there are some enticing relievers that are still on the board at this moment. And I think as we're drafting here, we're kind of crossing over into the next tier of position players. I think probably tier number 1 is pretty much off the board. There's one guy left you could maybe argue is still in that position player tier, depending on what you think of him. And I'm going to take him because I think he has a really strong 2024. And I'm going to take Max Wagner. I think he's the one guy left on the board that you could argue could be in the tier with the rest of those guys. I am going to take him. I'm going to put him at third base, and I'm going to just bank on the power playing up at Prince George's Stadium this year and us seeing like a little Max Wagner breakout.
I like it. I like it. Yeah, we're definitely entering a new tier here as far as position players go. I see a guy who I don't think is going to come back, but I'm going to go pitcher here with my next pick. Take my ace, and I'm going to go. Let's go Seth Johnson here.
Already taken.
Oh, wait.
Johnson is off the board.
Zach had him.
Oh, you did take Seth Johnson. Okay, well, you know what? I'm still going to go pitcher. I'm going to go Luis De Leon. Why not? Let's get young and international. Yeah, young international lefty. Gets mid-90s from the left side. Good off-speed stuff already. Real true breakout last year. He's entering national top 30 list. So he's still only, 19, 20 years old as well. Should be up in Aberdeen's rotation this year. I don't mind going the young lefty with good velo to anchor my rotation here.
Yeah, that's a great pick. Can't argue against it, but you left me the guy who John Mioli, frequent guest on our podcast, thinks will be a top 5 prospect in the system in the offseason between 24 and 25. The highest a pitcher has ever been selected in a draft by Mike Elias. I'm going with Jackson Ballmeister, who is a guy who can get up to the high 90s. Seems like he could move pretty quickly in the system. We haven't seen him pitch yet. He didn't make his professional debut following the draft last year, but give me the guy who a guy I trust. John Mioli thinks is going to be potential top 100 prospects. So Jackson Ballmeister it is.
So I've got several players in mind with my next 2 picks, but I want to shore up the rotation because I really am a big believer in this guy, and that's Trace Bright is going to be my next pick here. I really feel good about him as my number 2. Came a long way with his command over the course of the season. Entered the Orioles system with a good fastball curveball combination, but has gone leaps and bounds since then, gotten significantly better. I think this is going to be a big year for him. And then for this next pick, I am going to go position player, and it's really for me between three guys. But I'm going to roll with the ceiling here and take Matthew Etzel. I loved what he did coming out of the draft last year. Flashes a little bit of everything, can hit for average, has good speed, and move around the outfield. Showed some sneaky power that I don't think is going to translate in Aberdeen at least right away. But I could see this being a guy who puts together a productive year across two levels in the minor leagues.
That's a great pick right there. Yeah, I think he's definitely a guy that's going to be a lot higher in people's minds halfway through the season as he continues to develop. But if it's going back to me, I will go with the guy who I think is going to be this year's international breakout once they hit full season ball, and that would be Leandro Arias. I'll put him at shortstop. I think the fact that he got into a spring training game, got in at bat, pinch runner, got in the game, that is very odd for someone who has not even made their full season debut. I think that it could just be he was available and like bugging them to get on the bus to get in a game that day. But I think it could speak highly to what they think could be a breakout season, and I'm all about it. So give me Arias for my first infielder.
All right, taking the shortstop infield position I'm looking at here. But since the top options are gone, I'm going to wait a little bit on shortstop. I'm going to go back to the outfield. I'm going to stick with the international talent here. I'm going to go Thomas Sosa and put him out there in right field. This is a guy who we just had Anthony Villa, the new Orioles director of player development, on our podcast, and he hyped up Thomas Sosa as a name to watch. Sosa obviously apparently thinks he's the next coming of King Griffey Jr., which I love the confidence, but there's only one King Griffey Jr. But he was somebody who, obviously we haven't had eyes on him yet because he's had one season in the DSL and one in the FCL, but this is a big power hitting, left-handed hitting outfielder who, if you look at the numbers in his transition from the DSL to the FCL, like strikeouts went down, power went up, average went up. He was a completely different hitter statistically, making that jump. I'm super excited to see him in Delmarva this year, where I imagine he begins the year. And hopefully there's just a touch of King Griffey Jr. comes through and I get some good power numbers from him.
Yeah, I mean, I would take if Thomas Sosa was Ken Griffey Jr. That'd be nice. I feel like that would help the Orioles long term. I got to get some hitters. There's a couple of guys, if injuries weren't a thing, I would take, and they are Hudson Haskin and they are Reed Trimble, because I have really liked Reed Trimble whenever he's been able to step on a baseball field, but we haven't seen a lot of that, unfortunately. However, I still do need some outfielders, so I'm going to maybe take someone that popped for about a month or two last year and bank on him popping more, and that's Billy Cook for this year. I just think like how good he was. It was a month or so in the middle of the season where he was just basically the best hitter in the Orioles system. And then there were some other Billy Cook months where he does hit under 200 and the strikeouts go way up. And there's concerns about, how high his ceiling can truly be. Is he just another kind of Zach Watson type player? But I think the spurts that he shows, I would take him in my outfield. And then, I mean, most likely after that, I'm going to have to add another hitter here. So I might as well go with the guy that I believe I drafted last year when we knew absolutely nothing about him. Now we know a little bit more about him, but just for the namesake and what he got money-wise, I'm going to take Luis Almeida to put in my infield just to say, okay, maybe this is when we see him. Maybe this is when we get to truly evaluate him. And maybe this is when we get to see that talent kind of pop for him as well.
I can't go wrong with the young international guy who got paid a nice chunk of change. And I was assuming that you were going to go Connor Norby in the 1-2 turn there. And I was saving Billy Cook to put at second base later in the draft. So snipe me there on Billy Cook. I need a shortstop. So I'm going to go ahead and go grab my shortstop here and go Frederick Bencosme. Probably more ideally suited for second base, but he did improve the defense last year a little bit in Aberdeen. we just had him on our podcast. Check out the interview we did with him. That was a really fun interview. Zach and Bob handled that one nicely. The guy loves Chipotle and steal bases, which he did a lot in Aberdeen. We were kind of hoping the power would come through more last year, but honestly, I'm fine if the power doesn't come through. Give me the doubles, give me the stolen bases, give me that athleticism, give me the walks, and a guy who doesn't strike out. Only 67 strikeouts last year in 114 games. I'm fine with putting him at shortstop on this squad in between Connor Norby and Kobe Mayo.
Yeah, I was hoping to get him for second base a little bit later in the draft. Be fun to watch him at this prospect breakout game tomorrow night as well. I believe he's on that roster. So I'm going to go back to the pitching side, and I'm going to go with the biggest surprise from last year, and that's Alex Pham, a guy who was just like a generic, interesting reliever coming into the year and ended it like one of the top starting pitching prospects in the system. So give me Alex Pham. I think his mini Kyle Bradish over the top delivery is gonna work with the Orioles, and he'll continue his development. And he's going to be right behind Baumeister in my rotation.
We'll be continuing on with our Orioles minor league draft with the guys from Orioles on the Verge in just a moment. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Game Time, because you shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event or when you're buying tickets to an Orioles game. We are just about 2 weeks away from opening day. I know you're starting to think about tickets. Well, Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. That includes Oriole Park at Camden Yards. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And I have literally bought tickets on my phone on Game Time, standing just outside of Utah Street, right at the stadium. It's been 15 minutes before first pitch. I've grabbed a flash deal on Game Time, super cheap ticket, gets sent right to my app on the phone. I just stay on the Game Time app, show it at the gate, they scan it, and I go in. Game Time makes it that cheap, and that's simple as well. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
I'm going to add another outfielder with this pick. I'm going to go with a guy who last year in short season ball showed a little bit of everything, took some positive steps forward at the plate, and that's Braylon Tavera. Good athlete who I think is coming into his own at the plate. The power may not come around for him this year, but if he can get through that first full season with good walk to strikeout numbers, play solid defense in the outfield, I think you can consider that a success. We've seen some guys struggle with that transition from the FCL to Delmarva in the last couple of years, especially with not having a short season level in between now. But I like the chances of Tavera being able to go to Delmarva and perform well. And then for my next pick, I'm going to stick with the position players. And I really like Joshua Lorenzo for this pick here. And Lorenzo feels like someone who's probably going to be short season ball for the full year, but showed a lot of power potential in the Dominican Summer League last year. I think you see an upward tick in production this year with the move to the FCL and maybe a cup of coffee in Delmarva to end the season. And with that, Connor, I'll check my eligibility here, but I could put Lorenzo at third and move Horvath to the outfield.
Yeah, I believe that was going to be the move. I was actually looking up Lorenzo's eligibility. He only has third base. He played 2/3 of an inning at first base last year, and every other inning was either third base or DH. So we can throw him in at third, and then you can move Horvath to left field. I will check on that, but that should be fine. It's more about outfield in general, besides specific outfield position that you can put him in. So we will allow that, and Lorenzo makes your team at third base.
That brings it to me, and I'm going to get creative here, and I'm going to take a first baseman, but one who you don't think of as a first baseman. I'm going to go with Mr. Creed Willems as my first baseman, and broke out repeating Delmarva last year. Looked like he was on the verge of a huge season. Gets promoted to High A Aberdeen, struggles, but we saw how he was able to make adjustments between seasons in 22 and 23. So hopefully he can do the same thing and get back on track. But he's got a huge bat. He can hit home runs with the best of them. Walk rate got him a lot better last year. So I think he's the best first base prospect in the system that's left anyway.
Oh,
I was just going to
man.
jump in before anyone yells in the comments here. I do know that as we are putting Zach's team together, Braylon Tavera, technically positionally, only played 8 innings in left field. And on the flip side, Mac Horvath only played 9 innings in right field, or switch that around. Either way, we're going to let it happen because eventually these guys are going to play enough left and right field for them to be eligible in this draft. So I figure there's going to be at least one comment about that. We're just going to smooth that over now. And next up to Nick.
Well, Bob took my pick. I was going to go Creed. I was assuming you were not going to go there, but smart strategy because of, as we were talking about before we came on, the lack of true first base prospects in the organization. So I need to pivot, and let me shore up the outfield. Defense can be, maybe defense has some question marks on my roster, but you know what? I'm just going to bludgeon other teams to death here. And I'm going to go with Jake Cunningham in the outfield. If I need to put him at DH, I guess that works as well. But yeah, Cunningham, the tool shed, big power, athleticism, one of the most athletic draft prospects last year. I genuinely do think the Orioles got a good steal there. I know that term gets thrown around kind of loosely, but I think he should have been taken a couple rounds earlier in last year's draft. Good power. He's going to steal bases. Robbed a home run in Delmarva. Saw him hit 1 home run, I think, in his cup of coffee there. Went opposite field. So showing some chops out there in the outfield as well. I think Cunningham's going to be one of the guys that I think all of us are excited to watch across a full season this year, and hopefully fully healthy, because we know he had a couple injuries in his final year at Charlotte. So hopefully a fully healthy year and nice big breakout in Delmarva this year, and hopefully ending the year in Aberdeen.
Yeah, listening to your guys' show, it definitely feels like you guys are very high on Jake Cunningham, and excited to see him get a full season here and hopefully be healthy. This will be now the final pick of round 7 is the final pick of part 1. Don't worry, we'll be back tomorrow for part 2, but I'm going to play the game a little bit here more than take best player available, because I feel at this point in the Orioles system, there is Samuel Basallo, who is leaps and bounds ahead of everyone else catching wise. And then there are a couple of interesting guys, and Bob took one of them in Creed Willems, where I think the bat still has a high ceiling, and I think he did a smart thing by taking him and putting him at first base. I'm going to take a guy who there are still questions surrounding how to pronounce his last name, but the last time I saw it was Silas Ardway, I believe, is what we are going with at this point, which, hey, get the pronunciation from the guy. Doesn't matter how it's spelled, how it looks. Silas Ardway, I was super impressed. I actually remember watching him in college at Texas and was super impressed by the defense. I didn't know much about the bat, but it seems like it could play enough where if the Orioles just go in-house, most likely I would think they let James McCann walk after this year. If they decide, which could happen in 2025, to roster 3 catchers, with Samuel Basallo being one of them, where he plays first and DHs and kind of moves around the diamond, it's not necessarily just, Maverick Hanley now is kind of waiting for that spot. I think Silas Ardway, honestly, is that best option in-house if the Orioles do want to do that with the roster. And I think I get really good defense, and I'm going to take him. So that gets us to our first 7 rounds, and that takes us to our break, our end of part 1. You can hear part 2 of this tomorrow. We will read out our rosters to begin part 2, so you know where the teams stand. But we've got Nick Stevens, Zach Spedden, and Bob Phelan here from Orioles On The Verge. You can check out their podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And again, back tomorrow for part 2. So that was part 1 of our 2024 Orioles minor league draft with the guys from Orioles On The Verge. Thanks again to Bob Phelan, Nick Stevens, and Zach Spedden for joining us. Teams are starting to shape up with the first 7 rounds there, but don't worry, we will be back tomorrow to finish the draft. Rounds 8 through 13. These are for the real nitty-gritty prospect heads on tomorrow's episode. We're diving deeper into the system, filling out some of the holes on our teams, and you might even hear some names you've never heard of. That's the great thing about this draft. You can learn about some prospects that are a little deeper in this O system who could pop at some point. and hopefully make our teams that we're drafting look a little bit better. But that'll do it for today's episode. Again, we are back tomorrow with part 2 of the Orioles minor league draft. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.